before this election. I think, though, that this is the first time I think it will feel like he really is Prime Minister. Obviously, he was Prime Minister the moment he was sworn in by the Governor General, but now, back then there was sort of an asterisk applied of we don't know how long this guy is going to be around. We now know he's obviously got a mandate from Canadians through the election, and we know he's going to be around for at least a little while, probably a couple of years at least. I think, heading into this news conference, I think there are kind of a few things I'm listening for. One is how he reads those election results. In addition to being in a minority government, it's a pretty unique election result insofar as the second place party got more than 40% of the popular vote. So I'm interested to see how he sort of frames that. I'm interested to see if there's any indication of how he plans to sort of manage a minority parliament. He does have a fairly strong minority as these things go. But how is he going to work with the other parties? What are his kind of considerations in that regard? And then, I think the third thing I'm waiting to hear is sort of what his priorities are. How does he frame those kind of immediate priorities going into Parliament? Obviously, we'll hear a bit of that from the speech from the throne. But what are the kind of things that he wants to get to right away, particularly if we assume that Parliament's going to sit in May and then, potentially through June or even into July? What does he want to get done with those first kind of couple months? Yeah,
there's things he needs to outline in the throne speech that is about Parliament and about dealing, because we have an idea of what he wants to be as a Prime Minister, I think. I don't think we yet know exactly how he expects to function as a parliamentarian, especially in a parliament like this. But there's other issues, Aaron, off a legislative agenda, just interprovincial relations, federal provincial relations, and of course just trade with Donald Trump, right? All of these things are massive, and I guess we need to get a clear sense that, here comes Mark Carney. Let's let the man himself explain what he intends to do rather than us speculating about it. Here's Prime Minister Mark Carney in his first press conference since Monday's election victory.
Today. Hopefully this is the first of many times the Prime Minister will join us in this room. As you can see, there is a lot of interest in asking questions, so I hope you will afford us as much time as you can today. And with that, I will let you begin, and then we will turn to the room for one question and one follow.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Mia. Bonjour tout le monde. Good morning, everyone. On Monday, Canadians elected a new government to stand up to President Trump and to build a strong economy. Canadians also sent a clear message that their cost of living must come down and their communities need to be safe. As Prime Minister, I've heard these messages loud and clear, and I will act on them with focus and determination. Les Canadiens et Canadiennes ont fait entendre.
Canadians made their voices heard with a voter turnout rate that hasn't been seen in the last 30 years. Nearly 20 million Canadians voted, and even more of them voted in early voting than ever before.
The engagement of Canadians at rallies, on social media, and around the dinner table was very high. And while different visions were put forth by various contenders, we disagreed agreeably, and the leader of every party quickly and graciously accepted the results. At a time when democracies around the world are under threat, Canadians can be proud that ours remains strong. As I've been clear since day one of my leadership campaign in January, I'm in politics to do big things, not to be something. And now that Canadians have honored me with a mandate to bring about big changes quickly, I will work relentlessly to fulfill that trust. As I stressed on election night, I am committed to working with others, governing as a team in Cabinet and caucus, and working constructively across parties in Parliament. Working in real partnership with provinces, territories, and Indigenous peoples. And bringing together labor, business, and civil society to advance the nation-building investments that will transform our economy. In the coming weeks, I will unveil more of our plans to engage with Canadians as we embark on the biggest transformation of our economy since the end of the Second World War. This will be an incredibly exciting time as we take control of our economic destiny to create a new Canadian economy that works for everyone. We will begin to set out that new path for Canada with a new cabinet to be sworn in on the week of the 12th of May and the recall of Parliament on May 26th. We will have the privilege of welcoming His Majesty King Charles III, who will deliver Canada's speech from the throne on May 27th. Her Majesty the Queen will join this visit. This is an historic honor which matches the weight of our times. Je sais que beaucoup de Canadiens partagent mon...
I know that many Canadians share my enthusiasm about this.
To the immediate priorities of my government, beginning with our relationship with the United States. As I've stressed repeatedly, our old relationship, based on steadily increasing integration, is over. The questions now are how our nations will cooperate in the future and where we in Canada will move on. Peu après le début de campagne électorale,
Shortly after the start of the election campaign, I met with President Trump, or I spoke to him. We both agreed.
Canada se rencontrent après l'élection pour trouver des terrains d'entente entre nos deux pays. On Tuesday, I had a very constructive call with President Trump, and we agreed to meet next Tuesday in Washington. Our focus will be on both immediate trade pressures and the broader future economic and security relationship between our two sovereign nations. My government will fight to get the best deal for Canada. We will take all the time necessary, but not more, in order to do so. In parallel, we will strengthen our relationships with reliable trading partners and allies. Canada has what the world needs, and we uphold the values the world respects. Au cours des derniers jours, je me suis entretenu avec le président Macron, le président du Conseil européen d'Acosta, le Premier ministre du Japon, Ishiba, et le secrétaire général des Nations Unies, Guterres. J'ai aussi parlé au président Zelensky, auprès de qui j'ai réaffirmé l'engagement du Canada envers le peuple ukrainien. Dans les semaines et les mois à venir, je saisirai toutes les occasions d'échanger avec nos alliés et partenaires pour bâtir des relations renforcées, fondées sur des valeurs communes. Nous allons faire preuve de leadership à l'international. Nous aurons d'ailleurs l'occasion d'en faire la démonstration en juin, alors que le Canada présidera le sommet de G7. We will reinforce our strength here at home by building an economy that creates jobs, grows incomes, and withstands shocks. Pour y arriver, nous allons bâtir une seule économie canadienne.
We need to
au
build
lieu
one Canadian
de 13.
economy instead of
D'ici la
13.
fête du Canada, mon
By
gouvernement
Canada Day, my government
à l'atteinte
will reach that objective.
cet objectif. We will remove federal barriers to internal trade by July 1st to help unleash the full potential of Canada. We will work with provinces, territories, and Indigenous groups to identify projects that are in the national interest, projects that will connect Canada, deepen our ties with the world, and grow our economy for generations. We'll make the Canadian government a catalyst for these projects, not an impediment. And we'll always be guided by our conviction that our economy is only strong when it serves everyone. That means bringing down costs for Canadians and helping them get ahead. So we will put more money in Canadians' pockets with a middle-class tax cut that will take effect by Canada Day, saving two-income families up to $825 a year. We will protect the programs that save families thousands of dollars a year, including pharmacare and $10 a day daycare. We will expand the Canadian dental care plan to 8 million Canadians, saving the average family over $800 per visit. To lower costs for first-time homebuyers, we will cut GST on new homes at or under $1 million, allowing them to save up to $50,000, and we will lower the GST on homes between $1 million and $1.5 million. These tax measures will provide immediate relief, but they won't be sufficient to make housing affordable again. For that, we have to build. We will address failures in the housing market head-on, unleashing the power of public-private cooperation at a scale not seen in generations. We will slash development charges in half for all multi-unit housing. That's about $40,000 off the cost of a two-bedroom apartment in Toronto. And we will create an entirely new Canadian housing industry in modular and prefabricated housing using Canadian technology, Canadian skilled workers, and Canadian lumber. We will build houses faster, at lower costs, with a smaller environmental footprint in construction and greater efficiency once families move in. And to kickstart these efforts, we will create a new entity, Build Canada Homes, and provide $25 billion in financing to private developers. Nous allons construire 2 fois plus de logements par année et créer une toute nouvelle industrie.
We will
de la
construct 2 times as many
avec des technologies
homes
canadiennes
each
de
year and
travailleurs
create a new
qualifiés
industry,
canadiens.
construction industry,
canadien.
with Canadian technologies and qualified
My
Canadian
government
workers and
will
Canadian
focus
wood.
on keeping Canada secure as a sovereign nation and Canadians safe in their communities. We'll build a stronger Canadian armed forces to protect Canadians, defend our sovereignty, and support our allies. We will strengthen our border security with 1,000 more CBSA officers, as well as scores of dog teams, drones, and scanners to fight the traffic of guns and drugs. We'll strengthen Canadian law enforcement by hiring 1,000 more RCMP officers and giving law enforcement more tools to fight crime. We will toughen the criminal code and bail laws for those threatening the safety of Canadians, including making bail harder to get for those charged with stealing cars, with home invasion, human trafficking, and smuggling. Nous allons bâtir la confiance en notre système de justice, et nous allons faire de même
We will
avec notre
build
système de
confidence in our
l'immigration.
justice system, and the same thing
We
with
will
our
return
immigration
our
system.
immigration to sustainable levels by capping the total number of temporary workers and international students at less than 5% of Canada's population by the end of 2027. That's a sharp drop from the recent high of 7.3%, and this will help ease strains on housing, on public infrastructure, and social services. At the same time, we will work to attract the best talent in the world to build our economy. Canada has what everyone wants. We're a confident nation that celebrates our diversity, that believes in and practices free speech, that respects the rule of law, that has a vibrant democracy. We value innovators and builders. We trust science. We protect our immense natural heritage. For Canadians abroad thinking about returning to build their lives in our nation, there's never been a better time to come home. Dans toutes nos actions,
In all our
nous
actions,
serons
we will be
guidés
guided by
par une
a new
nouvelle
fiscal
discipline
discipline.
fiscale.
Our government will spend
Notre
less
dépenser
so that
moins
Canadians
pour que
can
les
invest
Canadiens
more.
puissent investir plus. Day-to-day government spending, the government's operating budget, has been growing by an unsustainable 9% every year. We will bring that down to 2%, less than half the average nominal growth rate of the economy. We will not cut any transfers to provinces, territories, or individuals. Instead, we'll balance our operating budget over the next 3 years by cutting waste, capping the public service, ending duplicative programs, and deploying technology to boost public sector productivity. We will use scarce taxpayer dollars to catalyze massive private investment. By working together, we can give ourselves far more than the Americans can ever take away. By working together, we can build Canada strong. Pour surmonter les défis auxquels
To overcome these challenges, Canada has to be united. Guided by this approach,
guidé par cette approche, j'ai échangé avec les chefs de l'opposition.
opposition leaders.
J'ai fait part de mon
I told them
intention
of
de
my
travailler
intention to
avec eux
work with them
pour rendre notre gouvernement plus
to make our
efficace,
government
soutenir nos
efficient,
travailleurs et nos
workable,
entreprises,
to support workers and businesses, and to bring our economy back on track.
J'ai aussi
I also
échangé avec les
spoke
premiers
with
ministres des provinces et territoires.
the premiers of provinces and territories who are essential partners with the federal government.
Avec eux,
And with them, I hope to be able to continue the work
le travail
that is needed
lors de la rencontre des premiers ministres que nous
that
avons tenue
that is
avant
needed with
l'élection.
premiers that we started before the election, when we decided and agreed to bring down interprovincial trade barriers and help labor mobility in the country.
Canadians in the NHL play for a variety of teams passionately against each other. But when they're in a once-in-a-lifetime series such as the Four Nations or the Olympics, those same Canadians come together to win it all. During elections, Canadians play and cheer for different teams. Now that election is over, and we are in a once-in-a-lifetime crisis. It's time together, it's time to come together to put on our Team Canada sweaters and win big. Il est temps d'être unis.
It is time to unite. United, Canada can do difficult things, things that have seemed impossible.
Now is the time for ambition, to be bold, to meet this crisis with an overwhelming positive force that is a united Canada. It's time to build, and my government is getting to work to build. Build big, bold, and build now. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. We will go to the room for questions. One question, one follow. Because there is a long list, let's try and keep the questions as short as possible. We'll start with Ashley Burke from CBC.
Good morning, Prime Minister. What specifically do you want to get out of your first in-person meeting with President Trump, and will you be focused on trying to get the tariffs lifted?
Thank you for the question. For the first meeting, as I mentioned in my remarks, and the President and I discussed when we had our constructive call, there are two sets of issues. There are the immediate tariffs, both sectoral and so-called reciprocal and fentanyl tariffs, and then there is the broader relationship. So addressing both sets of issues. We'll see how that progress goes. It's important to get engaged immediately, which has always been my intention, has always been his intention, and I'm pleased to have the opportunity for quite a comprehensive set of meetings that will take place on Tuesday.
How do you avoid an Oval Office ambush like we saw happen to President Zelensky?
Look, I go there with the expectation of constructive, difficult, but constructive discussions. That's the spirit of the conversations that the President and I had. You go to these meetings well prepared, understanding the objectives of your counterpart, and always acting in the best interest of Canada, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Mélanie Marquis, La Presse.
Bonjour, M. Carney.
Bonjour,
Félicitations. Vous avez réclamé un mandat fort pendant toute la campagne. Vous avez une minorité aujourd'hui.
You asked for a majority government through much of the campaign. Now you have a minority.
Au rapport de force avec l'administration Trump.
How will that affect you when it comes to dealing with Trump?
Merci pour votre question et vos félicitations.
Thanks for the question and the congratulations.
Je crois que nous avons un mandat fort.
I think we have a strong
Pendant la
mandate.
campagne électorale, j'étais très clair.
I think during the election campaign, I was very clear
Par rapport les Américains,
about how we would deal with the Americans,
une stratégie économique avec
building an economic strategy
de l'audace,
that is
des grands
bold,
projets, une
with
économie,
big projects, with one economy,
des nouveaux partenariats
and new
à l'échelle
partnership.
Et nous avons reçu plus de 8,5 millions de votes.
And we got more than
le plus haut niveau dans l'histoire.
8.5 million votes,
Nous avons
which is
des députés dans toutes les provinces.
a lot. We have MPs in every province,
Une majorité en 7 provinces sur 10.
and we got a majority in 7 out of 10 provinces.
Le niveau des députés le plus haut.
And the highest number of
par exemple,
MPs
depuis 1980, je crois.
since
Le niveau le plus grand dans l'histoire.
1980, and the highest popular vote
Une
in some time.
campagne très transparente
We ran a transparent campaign,
et un mandat fort.
and we have a strong mandate.
Cela dit,
But all that said,
travailler avec le Parlement.
we
et
will work
surtout
inside
avec
Parliament,
le Québec et
and we will
avec
work
les provinces
with Quebec and the provinces
afin de mettre en œuvre
to try to put in place
cette plateforme.
these objectives and our platform.
Par rapport à ça, est-ce que ça change votre rapport de force par rapport à l'administration Trump?
But does it change in any way your approach to Trump?
Vas-y.
Poser en même temps ma question de suivi. Là.
Oui.
Vous avez une minorité. Est-ce
You
que
have a
vous êtes
minority.
intéressé à accueillir au sein du caucus libéral des députés d'autres partis? Puis est-ce que
Are you trying to
les
attract
conventions ont déjà été
MPs
faites
from
en
other
vue
parties into your
pour
caucus?
les convaincre de traverser la ligne?
And
que-
to cross the floor?
Comme j'ai dit,
As I said.
mon mandat est fort.
My mandate is strong.
Nos objectifs est clair.
Our
Et, par
goals
exemple,
are
j'ai
clear.
eu des conversations avec.
I've had conversations with
conversations très constructives avec M. Blanchet.
I've had constructive conversations with the bloc leader
Le Canada, et une conversation constructive avec.
and a constructive conversation with Mr. Poilievre, too,
Notre stratégie par rapport aux Américains.
about our strategy with the Americans.
Il n'y a qu'un Premier ministre
There's only one prime minister,
et nous avons des objectifs assez similaires. Alors,
though we all have similar objectives in dealing with the Americans.
en ce qui concerne les négociations avec
And when it comes to
c'est clair pour
the negotiations,
Trump, qui est le Premier ministre du Canada.
it has to be clear to Mr. Trump who is the Prime Minister of Canada.
Oui, bonjour, M. Carney. Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Vous le savez bien, M. Poilievre n'a pas gagné son siège. Il va
Poilievre
donc
did not
essayer
win
de
his
revenir au
seat, and therefore he
Parlement
will
en
try to
demandant à quelqu'un de
return
lui
to
céder le
Parliament
sien.
by asking someone
Vous
else to
aurez, vous, à
give him
déclencher une
their
élection
seat.
partielle. J'aimerais savoir
Will you
quelle sera
hold a
votre
by-election?
réflexion
And I'd like to know
pour
what your
choisir la date
comments
de
are
cette
when
partielle.
it comes
Est-ce que ce sera
to
le plus tôt possible ou on
choosing
laisse
the date
attendre
of
jusqu'en
that
novembre?
by-election. Do you want to wait until November or do it as
J'ai
quickly as
déjà
possible?
indiqué,
I already told Mr.
déclencher
Poilievre
l'élection
that I will
partielle si
trigger
c'est,
a by-election
la décision de
if that is the decision
aussitôt
of
que
the
possible.
Conservative Party as soon as possible. Very simple.
I've already indicated to Mr. Poilievre that if it's the decision of him and the Conservative Party to trigger, if I can put it that way, a by-election, I will ensure that it happens as soon as possible.
OK.
No,
Et,
no games, nothing, straight.
OK. Et donc, je n'aurai pas de supplémentaire là-dessus, mais vous avez dit
So,
aussi, vous avez
you
demandé
also
au roi
said-
de venir- vous avez dit aussi que
You
vous allez
also
demander
said
au roi
that you
de
will
venir lire le
ask the
discours
king
du
to
trône.
come and
Vous
read
savez,
the
vous avez
speech
gagné
from the
beaucoup de
throne.
sièges au Québec
As
parce
you
que
know,
vous
you
êtes des
won a lot
nationalistes.
of
Acceptez-vous de prêter
seats
leur
in
voix,
Quebec.
leur
Do you
vote,
think
ils ont
that
pas de
nationalists from Quebec will agree to lend their voice? And nationalists are not necessarily in love with the British crown. How do you think this will be received, and how can you explain that to them? Well, it's simple. First of all, I asked the king, His Majesty, and he accepted. So he will be in attendance at the opening of Parliament. That is clear. And that decision highlights Canada's sovereignty as a nation. That's absolutely clear, and it's a very clear message being sent to other countries around the world. And it's an honor for us.
To be clear, I made the request of His Majesty, and he has accepted. He will open Parliament with the speech from the throne, and that is it clearly underscores the sovereignty of our country.
In what way, though? En quelle façon ça souligne la souveraineté de demander au monarque de l'autre pays?
How does it highlight Canada's sovereignty to ask the king to open Parliament?
But my question was cut off.
Okay, yeah. In what way? It underscores this is the ultimate head of state, which underscores one of the points I made. I'll answer it this way. Quand je suis devenu le Premier ministre pour la
When I
première fois,
became Prime Minister for the first time,
il y a des peuples fondateurs.
I mentioned the two founding peoples of Canada. Well, all the founding peoples, the Indigenous peoples, the English, and the French. And that is a clear indication of the foundation of our nation, the Canadian nation.
Kenzie Gray, Global.
Hi, Mr. Carney. In your second call with the president, did Mr. Trump outright say or insinuate at any point that Canada should become the 51st state?
He did not.
All right. We've heard Mr. Trump on April 23rd and his surrogates throughout the final days of the campaign reiterate the idea that they believe Canada should become the 51st state. On the campaign trail, you said on multiple occasions that respect for Canada would be one of the key things in terms of having a meeting with him. Do you think over the past few days we have seen respect for Canada from the Trump administration?
Look, I would. It's always important to distinguish want from reality. La volonté et la réalité, right? What someone wants and what is reality, and what the Canadian people clearly have stated, virtually without exception, is this will never, ever happen. And if any of the leaders of the party and their representatives would attest to that, I think the votes attest to it. I think the public dialogue attests to it as well. We are, we're meeting as heads of our government to discuss that partnership. Now, I'm not pretending those discussions will be easy, or they won't proceed in a straight line. There will be zigs and zags, ups and downs. But as I said in my remarks, I will fight for the best deal for Canada, and only accept the best deal for Canada, and take as much time that's necessary.
Davis Legree, iPolitics.
Hi, thanks for taking our questions. Just one from me to try and squeeze some more reporters in. But to my colleague's point, the White House's public position has continued to be that Canada should be the 51st state. You yourself have said that Donald Trump is trying to break Canada. Considering all that, how can you expect good faith negotiations when you travel to Washington next week?
Look, I think first I've had the direct conversation with him on whatever day it was, Tuesday, I guess it was, a couple of days ago. And we agreed to have those negotiations. Very clear discussion between us, as I said, very constructive. I would say the time allocated to our meeting and the seniority of he's the president, so that's as senior as you get, but the other members of his administration who will be assisting at those meetings suggests the seriousness of the discussions. Again, do not expect white smoke out of that meeting. There'll be white smoke probably later somewhere else in the world this month, but do not expect that. But so that's the first thing, is just the level of the direct dialogue, the discussion, the level of people there. The second point, I'll make it quickly, and thank you for restricting the question so others can get in, is that he respects, as others who are good negotiators, and he's one of the best negotiators, they respect strength. That's why we're building Canada strong. There's lots of reasons to build Canada strong, but the point is, and I will make this point repeatedly, we have more than enough to do here at home. That point about we can give ourselves more than the Americans can take away is absolutely right. We can have a bigger boost to our economy, to incomes, to jobs, by focusing on building one Canadian economy, by building these nation-building projects, by focusing on getting productivity up, by reducing government waste, by driving investment in this country. And so that is a good in and of itself. We're going to focus on that while we have these negotiations with the Americans. And if the negotiations with the Americans take longer, so be it. We've got more than enough to do here.
Kyle Duggan, the Canadian Press.
Mr. Carney, will you be pursuing a formal governing pact of any kind with the NDP?
No. Short answer, no.
And why not?
Why? That's my response. Is we campaigned on a very clear set of objectives, very clear policies to back those up, and we received the highest number of votes in Canadian history. Yes, it is not quite a majority, but highest number of votes. As I said moments ago, majorities in 7 of the 10 provinces, seats in all the provinces, highest vote totals and deputy counts in a number of those provinces. And it's also a style of governing as well, which is, in order to do what we need to do as a country, we will need to work in partnership with all the provinces, with Indigenous peoples. Yes, obviously, by definition in Parliament, we will need to get majority support to pass legislation. But this is legislation that Canadians, or at least we will be putting forth legislation that's consistent with our platform and consistent with the requirements of the time. And I will remind that it's not just words. We are in a crisis. If you look at the terrible manifestation of that today in Oshawa for the GM workers, 2,000 GM workers, and I'll just express my deepest sympathy for them and their families. A very difficult time. We are committed to supporting workers. All the dollars from our tariffs going to support workers. Fighting hard for our auto sector, all our sectors, in these negotiations with the Americans, and making sure that companies act in true partnership as well in maintaining employment and investment in Canada. And if not, there will be consequences for those companies. Thank you.
Louis Blouin, Radio-Canada.
Bonjour, Monsieur Carney.
Hello, Mr. Carney. In your vision of the upcoming negotiations with Mr. Trump, do you think it's necessary that the U.S. tariffs be lifted before you begin to negotiate an economic and a comprehensive agreement with the U.S.? Well, we'll see. That is one option. In a sense, Mr. Blouin, but I do not want to negotiate in public. There will be difficult discussions. For example, the tariffs, in our view, the fentanyl-related tariffs, well, it's not clear why they are still in place from our standpoint. But it will be a complex negotiation.
The essence of my answer was I don't want to negotiate in public, so I'm not sure I need to add the other words that were around it. But look, it is complex. Particularly, there are examples where, certainly from our perspective, the fentanyl tariffs, were not merited to begin with, but are even less merited given all the steps that the Government of Canada has taken and the progress that's been made. This will be a broader discussion, and it's one of the cards that they have, and therefore we'll see how it plays out.
In your opinion, what does President Trump want out of these negotiations? Well, that's one of the questions under discussion. He certainly has some goals. For example, some balance in terms of the trade balance, putting a stop to fentanyl, and increasing military spending. And the U.S. goals do, in fact, change from time to time. There's a lot of volatility there. But for us, it's really about having a win-win or reaching a win-win agreement with the U.S. in a world that is becoming more divided and dangerous. So there are sectors, strategic sectors, for the U.S. and for Canada. And one of the questions is, do we want to cooperate in those sectors, including on critical minerals, or the auto sector, aluminum? There are several examples, including in the energy sector. Or do we want to divide the North American market? That's not clear at this point, and the second choice certainly is not a good choice. But if he decides that's what he wants to do, Canada has other options. That is very clear.
We'll have time for one more very fast question. Catherine Levesque from the National Post.
Okay, I'll try to make it two very fast.
Good. That's the spirit. That's the spirit, Catherine. That'll get me coming back.
Your party picked up seats across the country but lost a few seats in Ontario. Why do you think that is, and did those seats cost you your majority?
Well, I think arithmetically, yes, but we could pick other, other seats that went various ways. We'll reflect on that. I think as I said at the top, what I take as the Canadians voted for many reasons in different circumstances. First and foremost, what we've been talking about most of this time, standing up to the Americans, getting the best deal for Canada. That's there. Relatedly, a strong economy that works for everyone. But also, clearly, affordability issues. We had a big focus on affordability, security, and safety. That's what we take. That's what we take as maybe I should say personally, I take as the mandate that the focus of this government should be on those issues. You know, as you know, to govern is to choose. You have to decide where you're going to focus. And I'm signaling, and of course there will be a speech from the throne and subsequent communications, but I'm signaling clearly where that focus is.
And can we expect your cabinet to be larger than your previous one? And will François-Philippe Champagne remain as finance minister?
Did he ask you to ask that question? Now we know your sources. Yeah. We will look. I committed to an efficient cabinet, a focused cabinet, cabinet with parity, gender parity, and we'll work towards it. Those final decisions haven't been made, so Monsieur Champagne doit. He will have to wait. Sorry about that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very.
I think we have to respect the president of the. We have to respect the.
I am truly sorry, but the Prime Minister does have to go.
Yeah, bien sûr, of course. Yeah. Okay. That's fine. That's fine. Yeah. What do you? No. Let's not get carried away. All right. Thank you.
Okay, that is Prime Minister Mark Carney finishing his first press conference since his election victory on Monday night, taking a number of questions and laying out a pretty ambitious agenda for the days between now and pretty much Canada Day. He began by acknowledging that the election sent a message that Canadians want the cost of living to go down. They want their communities to be safe. He revealed the King will be coming to Canada to deliver the speech from the throne when Parliament resumes on the 26th of May. Cabinet will be sworn in the week of May 12th. He is going to Washington to meet with President Donald Trump on Tuesday. He's promising free trade within Canada by Canada Day, a middle-class tax cut by Canada Day. He is promising to double home construction each year for the next several years, boost defense and border security, restore confidence in the justice system and the immigration system, and reduce government spending from its current annual rate of growth of 9% a year to just 2% a year, while also protecting transfers to individuals and to provinces. He said he spoke to Pierre Poilievre and promised the leader of the Conservative Party, who's lost his seat in Carleton, so is no longer technically the leader of the opposition, that he would call a by-election quickly, if that is what the Conservative Party chooses they want to do, and he ruled out seeking another governing arrangement with the New Democrats. And when asked why not, he said, why? So here to go through all of this, I had the CBC's chief political correspondent, Rosemary Barton, our senior writer at CBC.ca, Aaron Wherry, and our panel. Vanda Nakata was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and worked on Mark Carney's campaign. Tim Powers has worked as a strategist for Conservative parties, and Jordan Leichnitz is a former NDP strategist. Rosie, a lot there.
But that might have been the throne speech, actually.
It might have been less flowery. Yeah. It's very economical, but it kind of boils down to axe the tax, stop the crime, build the homes, and fix the budget. When you look at a lot of the core priorities, it's an interesting shift in this Liberal government stance on many issues.
Yeah, a couple things struck me, other than the amount of things he had to say, the substance, and the very aggressive, action-oriented, to use one of his words, agenda that he wants to put forward. And that is the reaching out to Canadians who clearly did not vote for him, though he is obviously impressed that he got the most votes in terms of the popular vote here. And he said majorities in 7 out of 10 provinces. But to me, that's what we should take away. If you voted for someone else in this election, if you didn't really know what Mr. Carney had on offer during the election, he's laid it out pretty clearly to you here. And he's also said the other things that were of concern to you, the cost of living, crime, the safety of your communities, those are also things that he is going to deal with. He made that very clear. He said, I'm in politics to do big things, not to be something. Yeah. He went out to say, I'm working with people, whether it be inside his government, talking to opposition leaders, talking to provinces, and how important that will be in terms of getting everything done. You know, when he was asked about Pierre Poilievre in the by-election, he said, no games. Nothing. Straight. Yeah. Meaning, let's get this guy into his job. I'm not going to be here to impede his ability to do his job. I have too much to do.
And there is Mark Carney walking down Spark Street here in Ottawa, a short walk from the National Press Theatre, presumably. I don't think he's going to the beer market. He's probably headed back to his office at 80 Wellington. in the Prime Minister's office, where there have been some protesters camped outside ever since the election, sort of heckling him every time he goes out in public. But, you know, the Prime Minister, he walked to this press conference. He's walking back from this press conference. Aaron, he did not walk back from commitments that he made in the election. He put pretty firm timelines on them, that Parliament's coming back at the end of this month, and he wants to have tax cuts and free trade and all these things done by Canada today. What do you make of what you heard from the Prime Minister?
Yeah, the language has not backed off, right? You know, our plans to engage with Canadians as we embark on the biggest transformation of our economy since the end of the Second World War. Our old relationship, speaking of the United States, based on steadily increasing integration is over. There was a line about, you know, fixing the failures in the housing market by unleashing the power of public-private cooperation at a scale not seen in generations. Like, you could have, I think there's one way they could have approached this news conference, which was to sort of tamp down a bit.
No, it was urgency. It was urgency.
And I think he's leaning into the idea, and he said it in the Q&A, that we are in a crisis. And I think that sort of segues into his approach to Parliament, which is, you know, yes, he's going to work with the parties, but I think the overarching message is we're in a crisis, so let's get, like, everybody needs
drop
to,
the games.
Everybody needs to work towards that. You know, it's sort of reminiscent in a way of the sort of COVID parliaments, where they're just, if the overarching message was, you know, Canadians don't have time for sort of fights in Parliament, they need to see things moving. I think that's the argument he's already making to the opposition parties. You know, so yes, he did say we're not going to do a governing pact, but clearly the message to the parties is Canadians expect us to do stuff, so let's do stuff.
And also, I would say too, he lowered expectations a little bit around what was going to happen with Donald Trump next week, in terms of saying there won't be white smoke. But he also said, we're having meetings with substantive people. We will find out who they are. They're going to be constructive meetings. This is going to be the beginning of a real conversation.
Yeah, no white smoke, playing off, you know, what's going to happen in Rome as the conclave gets going, but Vanda, hopefully just like no smoke at all, right? No black smoke, no gray smoke, no any kind of smoke. He does not want this to be, you know, a garbage fire. This needs to go well, and I think for the president as well, who's also facing some challenges economically and politically.
Absolutely, and I think this is where the Prime Minister shines. He's used to being in a crisis. He's used to probably dealing with different types of versions of Donald Trump in wherever he's been in his past careers. And I think he just wants to show this is a working collaboration. It's not going to be fixed tomorrow, but we definitely will see progress over time. I think he's showing that confidence to Canadians. People have been worried about tariffs and the cost of living. They are connected. And I think showing that I'm focused on this is he's above politics. That's why he mentioned talking about Pierre Poilievre, getting the by-election done, talking about uniting all Canadians, but laid out a clear vision that I think all Canadians, whether they voted for him or not, can get behind. So I think he wants to make that clear, but I think his objectives will be achieved, which is to fully progress with a working relationship back with Donald Trump for the sake of the Canadian economy.
Tim, what's your takeaway of all this?
Well, no smoke and mirrors then, continuing your smoke analogy at this juncture. I find it fascinating that the Prime Minister is often described as being politically naive, but this was political genius today in terms of what he is proposing to do with the Conservatives and understanding the political mood of the time. As Vanda said, right now, Canadians don't want the partisan nonsense. They don't want what they lived through the last 2 years. To say there will be no games is a positive thing for him to do and a relief to the Conservative Party. For the Conservatives, it will be interesting to see if they can play in this sandbox. And that may be the biggest test for Pierre Poilievre as he figures out his own leadership path right now. Because I think if there were a criticism that even Conservatives would mount of Mr. Poilievre is that you, sir, yet have to show us consistently how you would lead the country, not just the party. And Mark Carney is giving him an opportunity. And will they take it, and how will they manage all of it? But I think the last thing I would say, it should be no surprise to anybody, the Prime Minister wants to run fast. Well, I agree with what he says, that he has a strong mandate now, albeit a minority. He's got at least a year, and then it gets tougher because the other parties will have figured out their dynamics.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's hard to know for sure because it's still uncertain on what's going to happen with the Conservatives, right? And Jordan, obviously, the New Democrats have a whole bunch of thinking to do. But it was interesting. that's a favor and a grace he gave Pierre Poilievre that I'm not sure would have been reciprocal.
Very much.
know?
And I think that that's a bit the brilliance of this, right? It's something that his predecessor, Justin Trudeau, is not likely to have done. And it's something that Pierre Poilievre would have never done. And I think there's a recognition in these remarks clearly that a lot of Canadians who maybe even voted for Mark Carney are kind of getting a first look at him now that the election is over. And you can see in these remarks there were a number of olive branches, particularly going out to Conservative voters. The focus on crime and public safety. You know, he talks about that was a part of the Liberal offer in the campaign. It was not at all really a core message that they delivered during the campaign, but it featured very prominently here. He was careful to touch on domestic affordability issues, on housing issues. Again, things that were not hugely prominent in the campaign because of the Liberal campaign's focus on the Trump issue.
Right.
But he's making sure that those are front and center. And I think that the outreach to really indicate a more gracious tone towards Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives is very smart. It's also about giving the Conservatives space to fight. It's about giving them space to have those internal disagreements, to have that fight with the Ontario PCs and just let it all unspool for everybody to see.
Yeah, Rosie, I think that last point Jordan made is I don't know if there's mischief there, because, you know, one of the arguments for Pierre Poilievre to leave is that he doesn't have a seat. Mark Carney just kind of took that off the table and said, yeah, we'll make it happen for you. Let it go fast.
Yeah, I would say it's opportunity. It also runs the risk of being a very wily trap, right? Because if Mr. Poilievre doesn't see the way the Prime Minister is trying to, as Jordan says, be gracious and say we all need to work together. If Mr. Poilievre can't overcome the person he was as leader of the official opposition the last time round, he then runs the risk of hurting himself politically. So, yeah, I'm not surprised in any way that the Prime Minister did this. I actually think it's the right strategic thing to do, and it doesn't hurt the Liberal government in any way. But I do wonder whether it is an opportunity that might go south pretty quickly if the Conservatives can't get themselves sorted in terms of meeting this moment, because that is also what the election was about them not quite understanding where the country was at on particular issues. And on that front, I think the Prime Minister made it very clear where he thinks the country is at, and that is to respond fast and to respond as one country.
So Vanda, tactically and strategically, like the decision here, right? I mean, because Liberals were desperate to defeat Pierre Poilievre in Carleton, and they did it. And now it's almost like they're willing to give him a hand up so he can stick around. What do you think the thinking is there? Is it just a bit of parliamentary decency, or is it a tactic to show him a little bit weakened and dependent on the goodwill of the Prime Minister?
Having gotten to know him the last few weeks, I would say this is the kind of man he is. He doesn't want political games. I think for us political operatives, we may have thought of it differently. But I think for him, it's really just like, he's leader of the party right now. He wants a seat. I'll just make it happen. And that way, I don't have to deal with any nonsense around that. And I think he talks about how he's just focused on getting the business at hand dealt with. So listen, and that's up to them. Like, the Conservative Party has a journey to go through, whether they keep Mr. Poilievre or they choose not to. That's up to them. A journey to go through. But I think
so more like it's maybe like a quest. I would say.
They need a weekend retreat.
Also gracious,
you were very gracious.
But let them do that. And that's up to them and their membership to deal with. And I'm going to focus on my job. I don't want to have to deal with that. I have other things to focus on, is really what the Prime Minister would have been thinking through.
But it also speaks to that moment where he said, he was asked about other people he was talking to and Mr. Trump, and he said, there's one Prime Minister.
Yep.
Like, everyone has to work together, but there's just one guy that's going to negotiate this.
Right. So Aaron, he did talk about right off the top, like the opening remarks were not about dealing with Trump necessarily. Like, well, yes, it was to stand up to Trump and build an economy. But then he said also a clear message that their cost of living must come down and their communities need to be safe. You know, Jordan points out that public safety wasn't a core offer of their campaign, but Bill Blair was out with, you know, bail reform and other things that they were focused on. He is moving the issue set of his government clearly on what the issue set has been of the electorate. I mean, Trump, the economy, affordability, and safe neighborhoods, and then it's kind of like, that's it. Like, there's no fluff, is what I would say here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it fits. Both the Poilievre decision and this fit with, you know, Mark Carney's strongest argument is that he's the serious adult in the room, and he wants to get down to business and do things. And this all sort of fits together. I think Jordan's right that the last thing the Liberals want to do at this moment probably is give the Conservatives something to unite around. And if he delayed this by-election, Conservatives could get mad at him. But I do think it fits with the idea that Carney's trying to put forward. And, he is in the rare position of being a prime minister who more than 40% of the public voted for another party. As others have written, that hasn't happened since 1930. And so, I think sometimes there's a tendency to overplay the argument that the winner of the election has to reach out to people who didn't vote for him. But in Mark Carney's case, there really is a large part of the public that didn't vote for his party. And so there's something, both electorally and democratically smart about trying to reach out to those voters and say, I saw that you voted for somebody else, and I'm going to focus on the concerns that seem to really, drive your vote. And that's affordability, that's crime, that's change. And so, and for that matter, if we're going to be going into an election probably in 2 years or 3 years, there's every reason for the Liberals to take account of the fact that 40% of the public voted for another party. Right. And I think that's what you saw in those, the way he set it up in the first part is sort of like, I heard why people voted for me. I also heard why people voted for the other guy.
It's also important to pick up something Rosie mentioned that the Prime Minister himself says. Talk about rare. He is not a politician who's been a politician for 40 years. He's not encumbered by party politics.
He doesn't act like it,
though. And Vonda would appreciate this. The Liberal Party now owes him, effectively. And he is not here, I don't think, to do this job over 3 or 4 terms. He recognizes that he has an opportunity now, and he is going to try and push the envelope as best he can over that time period. That creates interesting challenges for the Conservatives, who are going to have to not only reconstitute their DNA around how they manage themselves, but how do they manage a new Liberal leader who they couldn't successfully define as just like Justin, who the public sees as a serious figure, who has no real political history to go back and look and analyze. So it creates a whole series of benefits for the Prime Minister and potential opportunities for the Conservatives if they figure this out quickly and don't self-emulate as more our party tradition.
Yeah, look, I don't. Vonda is just off one election camp. I don't know if you're ready for an election re-election and then 2 more. Yeah. But Jordan, he had promised that he kind of wasn't an ideological prime minister, that he was a pragmatist. These sorts of things. And when you look at what he laid out today, you kind of see evidence of that, right? It doesn't have sort of it's a more economical language style, and it's focused on sort of the bread and butter issues of the country.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think he's a consummate technocrat, and I don't mean that as an insult. Like, I think he really is into the details. He is into the policy. He wants to understand how this all hangs together, and I really do think he brings his own ideas to the table about this, and he is very much driving this policy agenda and the ambition, the speed, and the scope of it. Now, I think that also has given him the ability to reach into the Conservative policy playbook and scoop tons and tons of their commitments. And I think that that's smart because it allows him to try to pull back some of those voters, because it is a really significant amount of the popular vote that went to the Conservatives. He has to try to rebuild that. And what he's also trying to do there is reset the clock on change, basically. He's making the case, and he's trying to demonstrate, like, we are a new Liberal government. There is no connection to that Justin Trudeau Liberal government, because looking forward, you can imagine a 5th mandate is something tough. But I wanted to pick up on something that Aaron said, because I do think that there was a lot of graciousness in these remarks towards the Conservatives and towards opposition leaders, but I think that the note on the New Democrats might be a little less gracious, and that he has to be careful about that, because while he may have a strong minority, it is still a minority, and his dance partners are limited. The Conservatives are unlikely to be helpful in passing anything for him, and the Bloc as a dance partner is less appealing. These are the same people who were out just a week and a half ago talking about Canada as an artificial country. So while I totally agree it doesn't make any sense for any kind of a formal agreement with the NDP, there is a need for him to outreach to those voters who are New Democrat voters who voted for the Liberals. And, they don't necessarily want to see that party die. So I think that there is maybe some self-interest there that could find fuller expression in the days and weeks to come
Yeah.
about courting that vote.
Yeah, but Von, we've only got about 5 minutes left, just so you know, because we're going to give the network back at noon. But he's ruled out a supply and confidence agreement. He was kind of non-committal on the poaching of people, which is sort of the frenzied rumor. I don't know if that's going to happen now. They're down to 168, and one other seat in Newfoundland and Labrador still up for a recount. How does he approach this Parliament? Because it's an aggressive agenda. Cabinet's not going to be in place for another week. And then after Cabinet, it's like 6 weeks to cut taxes and bring free trade to the country internally.
I think he just did it. It's about making the appeal to the public and saying that if you want all these things and this vision for the country, you have to, you want to make this work. And I think for the Conservatives, it behooves them to make it work with him. Because if he is showing himself to be the adult, if he's showing himself to be gracious and the pragmatic leader that he's saying that he is, then maybe it should make it easier to move things along. And I think he's also used to negotiations with people. He'll talk to Pierre, whoever the leader is, to make sure things happen, but also make the appeal to the public itself.
Right.
And therefore, if you want to keep your party, if you want to grow your votes, if you want to have a chance here, and understand that Canadians have been looking for this, then why not work with him? And I think he's quite confident. I know he's confident to be able to do that.
Yeah, and Aaron, it's interesting that the First Minister's table has been more functional and interesting under Mark Carney's stewardship than in the past. And so if the premiers are all working with him, with some outliers, and if Parliament then gets dysfunctional like it had been before, it maybe the contrast might send a message of where the problem lies.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll see how long it lasts on both fronts. I think Jordan's right that, Carney can make the argument that we're in a crisis, everyone needs to work together. I'm acknowledging that 40% of the public voted for the Conservative Party, and I'm reaching out to them. But the Joe Clark lesson is that sometimes things fall apart. Yeah. And if you're overly confident and you aren't keeping track of the math, the Liberals can tell themselves the NDP doesn't have a leader, they're not going to be looking for an election for 2 years, et cetera, et cetera. But if you just take those votes for granted in the House, stuff happens, and they need to make sure that they've got the votes. And if they take votes for granted, they could have this Parliament fall apart pretty quickly.
Yeah, and Rosa, I guess the trick then is whatever goodwill exists right now because of the moment, and we'll get a sense of how that locks in after the meeting with the President on Tuesday. Don't abuse that. Don't take it for granted, and don't take advantage of it.
But the question around a pact with anybody, I think, was also an important contrast point to Justin Trudeau in terms of that is not the way I'm going to deal with this. I think he will reach out to the NDP as needed. I don't discount that at all. But I think that was an important differentiation point between him and the previous Prime Minister. I will say also that I think, not unlike an American president at the beginning of his term, he has a very interesting window here from when the House comes back to the end of June. Hope to God he rises it at the end of June. And I think he will get to a place where it will be very difficult for Conservatives to not support whatever's done on interprovincial trade, to not support a significant middle-class tax cut, to not support bail reform. So he has a window here where actually it's more than just the NDP and the Bloc who will potentially work with him. It could be more people. And that's not going to last. Yeah. So if he can push some of that agenda forward very quickly, then I think he can turn to bigger things where it's going to be more complicated to negotiate with parties. I mean, listen, this is someone who is, as Vandana said, very confident in what his ideas are and what his abilities are. And now we're going to see them be tested in a parliamentary way that he hasn't experienced before. And I think that's sort of the unknown factor in this.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Tim, just in 20 seconds or so we've got here, his first question period will not include Pierre Poilievre. We don't know who will be leading off as Leader of the Opposition and who will move into Stornoway in this interim period if that's what the Conservatives end up doing there. So no matter how quickly he goes in the by-election, it's not going to be Poilievre.
But he's thrown it to the Conservatives now. Do you have Andrew Scheer, who speaks to another era, another time, who the Canadian public has rendered a verdict on, asking your questions? It was pretty clever that way, too. So we'll see who the Conservatives put up. Big test for them.
Yeah,
right
well,
call.
Andrew Scheer will be speaking to Canadians tonight on Power and Politics because
Wonderful.
It's a whole new world. And the House Leader for the Conservative Party and former Leader of the Conservatives will be joining me here in the studio later today. All right, we're going to leave it there. The quick highlights from what Prime Minister Carney announced today is that Parliament will resume on the 26th of May. King Charles has accepted an invitation to come to Canada to read the speech from the throne. The new cabinet will be sworn in the week of May 12th. And on Tuesday, Prime Minister Mark Carney and a delegation of ministers and officials, we presume, will be headed to Washington, D.C. to meet with President Donald Trump. I want to thank Rosemary Barton, Aaron Weary, Vanda Cotter, Tim Powers, and Jordan Leichnitz. I am David Cochran. We'll be back with Power and Politics in 5 hours and 14 seconds. Arthi Pohl continues our coverage next, right here on CBC News Network. See you in a bit.